So Parshas Toldos on page 125 in the Art Scroll Chumash begins, and these are the offspring of Yitzchak, son of Avraham. Avraham begot Yitzchak. So right away Rashi jumps in with the Medrash that says it calls him Yitzchak, son of Avraham, and then it says Avraham begot Yitzchak. That is the definition of being a father. So why does it say both? So that is. So why does it say both? So the Medrash says that Avraham did not have sons for a very long time, and especially he didn't have sons with Sarah for a very long time. And then Sarah gets kidnapped by Avimelech, the Philistine king, and then all of a sudden she has a son, Yitzchak. So people were talking that maybe that son really isn't Avram's son, and it's really Avimelech's son. So therefore, the Hashem made Yitzchak look exactly, his face looked exactly like Avraham, so nobody would have any kind of doubt as to who the father was. And so the Medrash says that's what the Torah is saying. These are the offspring of Yitzchak, son of Avraham. Avraham begot Yitzchak. Nobody had any question about that because he looked exactly like him. So it continues. Yitzchak was 40 years old when he took Rivka, daughter of Besul the Aramean, from Padan Aram, sister of Lavan the Aramean, as a wife for himself. So it gives Rivka all kind of lineage. It says that she was the daughter of Besul the Aramean, from Padan Aram, and the sister of Lavan the Aramean. Why does it give so much of her lineage? And I say it's to tell us that how righteous she was, that she came from that kind of background where her father was Besuel, who was wicked, and her brother was Lavan, who was wicked, and she came from a place like Aram, which was a place that was not full of righteous people, yet still she herself was righteous. Okay, in verse 21, Yitzchak entreated Hashem upset his wife because she was barren. Hashem allowed himself to be entreated by him, and his wife Rivka conceived. So this is a theme that, as we've mentioned, Sarah did not have children for a long time. Rivka did not have children; she was barren, and Rachel also did not have children for a long time. Why is that? And the Medrash says that Hashem desires the prayers of the righteous and gives them opportunities to pray with all their heart and soul, and by giving them these troubles so they would pray. The Malbim, and I think it's the Malbim, says that there's a deeper meaning there, and that is that these are patriarchs, were people that are the cornerstones. They're the foundation of the Jewish people. And we know when a building, when the foundation is weak, the whole building crumbles. That the lower down you get in the support, the stronger it has to be. And for the Jewish people to be strong, our patriarchs and our matriarchs had to be giants. They had to be spiritual giants. And for that, and to be a spiritual giant, they had to be brought about there through tremendous prayer, through really superhuman prayer. So it couldn't have just been that they were born like any other person would be born. They needed to have that spiritual beginning of these people praying with these great people praying with all their might. And that would bring about that they would be spiritually strong. Okay, so his wife Rivka conceived. It continues, the children, in verse 22, the children agitated within her, and she said, if so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Hashem. And Hashem said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 regimes from your inside shall be separated, the might shall pass from one regime to the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. So as to her question, if so, why am I thus? Meaning, which literally means, if this is how it is, why do I even exist? Why am I alive? And the commentaries say the Klei Yakar, I'm kind of basing this on the Klei Yakar. He doesn't say exactly this, but that she was disturbed. That the Medrash says that whenever she passed a shul, a study hall, so there would be a ruckus inside, like they were trying to get out. And whenever she would pass an idolatrous temple, so there would also be a ruckus inside trying to get out. And she felt that was a sign that the child within her wasn't completely wicked, wasn't completely righteous. He was going for both. He was going for either going for the pagan temple and going for the shul. which implied that he was kind of, I don't want to say neutral, but it wasn't that this was going to be the wicked child, like Avram had a wicked child, Yishmael, and it wasn't the righteous one that like Sarah had Yitzchak. He was both. He was going for both, and that disturbed her because she was saying that I have to be the mother of like we said, I have to bring about the cornerstone, the foundation of the Jewish people, and just anyone won't go. Just an average person, somebody who goes for both, isn't good enough. So she said, like, why am I even here if this is the child that I'm going to have? And so she went to inquire of Hashem of the prophet, and the prophet told her that it's not that you have one that's good and bad. That's sometimes does right, sometimes does wrong. You have two of them. One's great, one's going to be very righteous, and one's going to be wicked. And the Klei actually explains that even the one that is two regimes from your inside shall be separated. And that means that there's going to be righteous within both of them. That even the one who's wicked will have a righteous side to him. And he says the Medrash says that came about by Rabbi and Antoninus. That's Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the author of the Mishnah, was actually very close with the Roman governor at the time, Antoninus, and they talked and they studied together, and so he was right. He himself was righteous. So we're saying even from Esav, Rome was a descendant of Esav, that even from Esav's descendants, there will be some who are righteous, and some will even join the Jewish faith, join the Jewish people. Okay, so moving on. On page 127, when her term to bear grew full, then behold, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red entirely like a hairy mantle. So they named him Esav. He was covered in hair. After that, his brother emerged with his hand grasping onto the heel of Esav. So he called his name Yaakov, which means heel. Yitzchak was 60 years old when she bore them. So his hand was grasping onto the heel of Esav. The commentaries say that this is a symbolism that even though in the beginning Esav is the one who's going to rule, that Esav conquered the world, that they were Rome, like we said, Rome was a descendant of Esav that controlled much of Europe and North Africa was controlled by Rome. They controlled Egypt, and they conquered. Am I confusing the Greeks and the Romans? Who conquered Carthage? That was the Greek. That was the Romans. That was the Romans, which was like Tunisia, right?
Yeah.
And they conquered much of Europe all the way through Britain. So Esav really controlled a lot of the Western world, and the Jews were, when they were independent, a very small country, and most of history they've been ruled by other countries. But at the end of the day, Yaakov's holding onto his heel to say that at the end of the day, Yaakov's going to come out on top. That in the heel, at the end of the heel is the end of the body, that all the way at the end of time, Yaakov will be the one who comes out on top. So in verse 27, the lads grew up, and Esau became one who knows trapping, a man of the field, but Yaakov was a wholesome man, abiding in tents. And our sages say abiding in tents means that he stayed in the tent to study Torah. Some commentators also said, the Klei says, bringing a medrash, that Esav became one who knows trapping, a man of the field, that meant that he was someone who was copiously adulterous, and he would be trapping and out in the field with other people's wives. Whereas Yaakov was a man who stayed in the tent, meaning that he stayed with his wife, or wives in his case. And Yitzchak was 60 years old when she bore them, and where am I? In verse 28, Yitzchak loves Esau, for game was in his mouth, but Rivka loved Yaakov. So there's two ways of understanding this. Game was in his mouth, meaning that Esau fulfilled the mitzvah of honoring his father by trapping food for him, that he would trap game, wild animals, and he fed his father Yitzchak. Or our sages say that this means that game was in his mouth, means that he was very smooth-tongued and was able to trick his father and to deceive his father, to cause him to think that he was really righteous, or much more righteous than he was. But Rivka loved Yaakov. That it means it did, and when it says that Yitzchak loved Esav, it's not to exclude Yaakov, but he loved Esav too. Whereas Rivka just loved Yaakov, not Esav. And remember, Rivka grew up with a brother like Lavan, who was the ultimate con man, as we'll see in next week's Parsha. So she knew a deceiver when she saw one, whereas Yitzchak, it seems, was less able to see through someone like Esav. So in verse 29, Yaakov simmered a stew, and Esav came in from the field, and for he was exhausted. Esav said to Yaakov, "Pour into me now some of that very red stuff, for I am exhausted." He therefore called his name Edom, which means red. Yaakov said, "Sell me as this day your birthright to me." And Esav said, "Look, I'm going to die, so of what use to me is a birthright?" And on page 129, Yaakov said, "Swear to me as this day." He swore to him and sold his birthright to Yaakov. Yaakov gave Esav bread and lentil stew, and he ate, drank, got up, and left. Thus Esav spurned the birthright. So this whole incident that we see later, the stew that he was simmering was the lentil stew. And our sages say that lentil stew was a traditional meal that was given to mourners. That there's a custom that when someone's in mourning, they lose a loved one, a close relative. So their first meal after the burial is provided by the community or by their friends. And Rashi says the tradition was that they would give lentils, or the commentators say we give eggs. And the reason for that is that they're round. And it's to represent the cycle of life, that, you start off as young and needing assistance, and you can't really live on your own, and then you get old, and you grow up, and you become powerful, you can take care of yourself, and then as you get older, people need assistance again, and it kind of goes back to where they started. And that life is a cycle. We're not there, we're there, and then we're not there again. And so that's the traditional meal for the mourners. And this was a meal for the mourners he was making for his father, Yitzchak, because this was the day that Avram had died. And I say to say that Yitzchak lived 180 years, whereas Avram lived 175 years. And the reason for that is that Hashem didn't wanted to bless Abraham, that he wouldn't see his grandson, Esav, becoming wicked. So he had Avram die 5 years earlier than his time, which would have been the same lifetime as Yitzchak, but he had him die 5 years before his time, so he would die satisfied and happy, and not seeing his grandson go off in a wicked direction. So what's that?
Then why does not Yaakov live to?
I don't remember the number. Was it 173? I don't remember the number. Yeah. I know 100. I don't remember the number, but I say part of that is that there was Yaakov was. No, I'm thinking of Yosef. I am confused. But Yaakov, no, it's Yaakov. Yaakov was away from his father for a long time, and I say that was time he wasn't able to fulfill the mitzvah of honoring his father, and that took away from his lifetime.
Oh.
But okay, so that's the stew that he was making, and it was the stew for the mourner. And Esav said to Yaakov, "Pour into me now some of that very red stuff, for I'm exhausted." One of the commentaries said, I don't remember who, it might have been the Malbim, says that Esav said to pour it into me, that he was embarrassed that he was coming in from the field, he was coming up from a big hunting trip, and was embarrassed to be barging in like that, starving at a mourner's meal. And he wanted to make it. It was. This is after Avram had died. So this was the meal that Yaakov was preparing for his father Yitzchak, who was in mourning for Avram. That's what the commentaries are saying. So he didn't want to. He wanted it to make it look like he didn't realize what was going on. So he told him, "Just pour it into my mouth," as if he doesn't even see what it is. So he's not even looking at it. But he says that some of that very red stuff, pour into me some of that very red stuff. why, and therefore they called his name Edom. They called him red. Like you find people with red hair are called red, but that's something like defines it. A redhead is a thing. But why is it because he asked for red stuff, they call him red? And this is one of my Rosh Hashiva, Chaim Bressler, spoke about this every year. He had a Torah on this. That if like people, a lot of times when people don't recognize something, they don't know what it is. Can you please pass the red stuff? Do we call them red? Why is it that like we call a person a name? It's because like that's the most obvious thing about the person that defines them. So why is it that it seems that because he asked for red stuff, that's what defined Esav? So my yeshiva answered that what does it mean when you ask for something by the color? It means you don't see what it is. Meaning that if you asked for, let's say you asked for Cheerios, you would say, "Can you please pass the Cheerios?" If you say, "Can you please pass like the circle stuff?" That kind of indicates you don't know, you don't see it for what it is. You don't see it as food. It's just the shape is all that matters. And Esav, and the wicked especially, Esav, our sages say, was someone who was completely physical, with like there was nothing spiritual to him. That no spiritual ambitions, no thoughts about the spirit, just about today. What makes me feel good right now? And for such a person, the what the food is doesn't really matter. It just matters, just fill me up, and how it looks, how just like how does that make me feel right now? And so he was saying just like that red stuff, just whatever's on the surface is that's what he wants. And that's why they called him red, because that defined who he was. Someone who just saw the surface, who just saw how does it make me feel physically right now? And that's all that mattered to him. And that's really the theme of this whole conversation. That Yaakov said, "Sell me as this day your birthright to me." And Esav said, "Look, I'm going to die. What use is a birthright?" Meaning that a birthright is something that's really, passed on for me. It's a legacy that's passed on to the family, the next generation, the next generation. He's like, I'm going to die. And whatever happens to my family after me, that has nothing to do with me because I'm going to be gone. And someone who just sees the surface, just sees the right now, and nothing more matters to him. And the Kol Yaakov explains that statement as something that really Yaakov convinced him. And the Kol Yaakov says that this whole demonstration of the lentils, that this was a mourner's meal, led him in that thinking in that direction. That he saw the lentils, he saw this was a mourner's meal, and said that it just reminded him about death and reminded him that he lived a dangerous life. He was a trapper, and as we said, our sages say that he was a copious adulterer. And those are dangerous things to do because people get it in their head to dispose of somebody who's who's first of all out in the fields and is a target, and who's involved with their wives. So he was saying, like, who knows if I'm going to be alive tomorrow or the day after that? What used to me is a birthright, which is something that comes years later. Who says I'm going to be alive then? And that's why he was willing to sell it. So, and Yaakov said, swear, and etc. That's what they did. So on page 129, chapter 26, there was a famine in the land aside from the first famine that was in the days of Avraham and Yitzchak went to Avimelech, king of the Philistines, to Gerar. Why did he go there? It's because Hashem appeared to him and said, do not descend to Egypt, because in verse 3, sojourn in this land, I will be with you and bless you. For you and your offspring, I will give all these lands and establish the oath that I swore to Avraham your father. I will increase your offspring like the stars of the heavens. I'll give to your offspring all these lands, and all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your offspring, because Avram obeyed my voice and observed my safeguards, my commandments, my decrees, and my Torahs. So he said, you're going to inherit this land, and you don't leave this land. Even though Avram left the land of Canaan to go to Egypt, Yaakov left the land of Canaan to go to Aram Naharaim, but to go to Aram, to look for a wife, and he married Leah and Rachel there. But Yitzchak was not to leave the land. He was brought as an offering, and that made him so holy that he couldn't leave the land of Israel, the Holy Land. So he settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked about his wife in verse 6, he said, she is my sister, for he was afraid to say my wife, lest the men of the place kill me because of Rivka, for she is fair to look upon. And here it's, so it's safe to say, what did he see to say that, what made him afraid? What made him say that she is my sister? So the commentaries say, first of all, that they were asking about her. Just like when you come to a new place and people start asking you, like, who's that woman with you? So that itself was an indication that these people were after her. Especially the commentaries, the Kli Yakar, I think, says that the Hebrew, if you look in the Hebrew in Pasuk Zayin, verse 7, it's Vayishalu anshe hamakom li'ishtai, which ArtScroll translates as about his wife. Literally, that means they asked to his wife. And the Kli Yakar says that they were actually asking her personally, that the men were going over to her and like, what's your status? And that itself is showing that they're very immodest and they're chasing after her. So he said, she's my sister. And in verse 8, and it came to pass as his days there lengthened, that Avimelech, king of the Philistines, gazed down through the window and saw, behold, Yitzchak was jesting with his wife Rivkah. He was peeking through the window and saw Yitzchak them acting as husband and wife. Avimelech summoned Yitzchak and said, but look, she is your wife. How can you say she is my sister? And Yitzchak said to him, because I said that I would be killed because of her. And now Avimelech protests against this. It says, what is this you have done to us? One of the people has nearly lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. The commentaries say this front says, who's one of the people? It means the one, the singular one of the people, the king. He was saying, what was he doing peeking in the window? He was suspicious himself, but he was after her as the king. And you would have brought guilt upon us. And then, but what he did do the right thing in verse 11. Abimelech then warned all the people, saying, "Whoever molests this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." So he had the protection of the king. Whereas with Avraham, when he went to Egypt, and the same thing happened, Pharaoh sent him away. He said, "I can't protect you. The people will kill you, and I can't protect you." Whereas the Philistines, it seems, were not as our sages call the Egyptians shtufe zima, that they were completely drowning in immorality. And Paro recognized he wouldn't be able to protect him, but Avimelech was, and the people would listen to him with that. So in verse 21, Yitzchak sowed in that land, and in that year he reaped 100-fold, meaning 100 times what one would expect to yield from what he planted. And the commentaries say, it says he, in that land, which was not a great land, and at that time, which was a bad year for growing, he still got 100 times what one would expect. Thus had Hashem blessed him. He became very great, and in verse 14, he acquired flocks and herds and many enterprises, and the Philistines envied him, which is a pattern that happens to us over and over again. That we come to a land many times because we were expelled from the old land, and we go into business and we become successful. Hashem blesses us with success, and those around us become jealous. And it says that they filled in all the wells that Avraham, who lived in the Philistine lands, dug. And in verse 16, and Avimelech said to Yitzchak, "Go away from us, for you have become much mightier than we." That you're an immigrant, a stranger, an alien living among us, and you're being more successful than us. Go away. And our sages say that the Hebrew there, for you have become much mightier than we. The Hebrew is, where am I? Ki in verse 16, Pasuk Tazayin, Ki atzamta mimenu ma'od could be read as you're becoming mighty from us, meaning that they're saying you're a parasite and you're taking away our wealth. And you're becoming wealthy on our backs by sucking us dry, which once again is a pattern that the Jewish people have seen over and over again. And so in verse 17, so Yitzchak departed from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and dwelled there. And Yitzchak dug and knew the wells of water which they had dug in the days of Avram his father, and the Philistines had stopped them up after Avram's death. And he called them by the same names his father had called them. So in verse 19, Yitzchak's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of fresh water. The Hebrew is, and where is it? Be'er Mayim Chaim, which usually means flowing water, meaning like he dug and found a spring of water where the water was just gushing out of the ground. The herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Yitzchak's herdsmen, saying, "The water is ours." So he called the name of that well Asek, because they involved themselves. They had a fight with him over it. Then in verse 21, they dug another well and they quarreled over that also. So he called his name Sitna, which means it comes from Satan. It's like the accuser. And then in verse 22, he relocated from there and dug another well. They did not quarrel over it, so it called his name Rechovos, which means like why open space, tranquility. We have and said, for now Hashem has granted us ample space, and we could be fruitful in the land. So why is the Torah giving us the story of all the wells that he was digging? So the Ramban says that we've said before, and that's really a big principle of the whole book of Bereshit, the whole book of Bereshit of the stories about our patriarchs and matriarchs, is that whatever they did set a precedent for what was to happen to their descendants. And the Ramban even says about this whole incident in Gerar and amongst the Philistines, he said that this was really representing their exile in Babylon. And because he says Yitzchak, that Avram earlier went to Egypt, and that was the a precedent of our exile into Egypt. You're wrong about that. I could be confused. But Yitzchak, but when Avram went to the Philistines, he went really of his own volition. It wasn't really an exile. He just settled there. Yitzchak, though, went because of a famine. So that was like another exile, and this was representing the exile of Babylon, where when we were exiled to Babylon, this was the first exile. So we were brought to a place of our forefathers, because Abraham had come from Babylon. That's Abraham had lived in, I want to say Aram Naraim, not Aram is. He says it's the other place.
What's that?
What's that? Or Kasdim, yes, Or. So he lived in Or Kasdim, which was in Bavel, which was in Babylon. And so our patriarchs have been there before. We returned to where our patriarchs had been, and Yitzchak returned to the Philistines, where Avram had lived previously. And the same way that Yitzchak was very successful there. It wasn't like one of these exiles where where we were completely oppressed and we were broken by the country that we were in and enslaved. When we were brought to Bavel, the Jews very quickly became settled there and became very successful there. And also Yitzchak, he wasn't really bothered much there by the Philistines. Eventually, they drove him out because he was so successful. But they never even kidnapped his wife. Whereas earlier, when Avram went to Egypt, so Sarah was kidnapped by the king, they didn't take away his wife. So they treated him very well. This represented our exile in Bavel. So these wells, he says, the digging of the wells represents the temples. That the first well that was called, it says the herdsmen of Gerar called Isaac's herdsman. The word herdsman is roye. It means herdsman. It's also the leaders of the Jewish people are also called roim, called herdsmen. That just like a shepherd shepherds a flock of sheep, so the leaders shepherd the people. They lead the people. And by the first temple, the people, for the most part, lived in peace with each other, but the leaders of the Jewish people fought with each other. And especially there were the kingdom, the Jewish people were split into two kingdoms, where we had the kingdom of David, and the north seceded from that kingdom, and very different from what happened in America. But the north seceded from that kingdom and had the kingdom of the 10 tribes, and those leaders fought with each other. So that's this. The first well was the first temple, where it was the herdsmen fought over it. And the second temple, though, the second well represents the second temple. They quarreled over that also. It doesn't say the leaders, the herdsmen quarreled. They quarreled. And the second temple, our sages say, was destroyed because the people did not live in peace with each other. But the people hated each other for no reason. And they call this name Sitna, which is the accuser. The accuser was living amongst us with all this fighting that we did. And the third one, it said that they did not fight over, and we called it Rehovos. So we have all this space. And that's the third temple. May it be built speedily in our days. And then in verse 23, he went from there to Beersheba, and Hashem appeared to him and blessed him. And he built an altar there, and also the servants dug a well. And Avimelech went to him from Gerar with a group of his friends, and Fichol, general of his legion. That name comes up again also in later with Shimshon, Samson, when he fought against the Philistines. So the general then also was called Fichol. I don't know if that was the name they gave to the general or just
like the title of the general.
Yeah, it was the Fichol. Yeah, right, versus the actual name. The Ramban talks about this Avimelech, that also we find Avram, with Avram, the king was called Avimelech. Here he's called Avimelech. And he also posits that it's not, Avimelech wasn't his name. That's like the father king. It's the father king. That's the title also. But Yitzchak said, "Why have you come to me? You hate me and drove me away." And in verse 20, and they said, "We have indeed seen that Hashem has been with you." So we said, "Let's have an oath and a covenant between us." And that's what they did. And here the commentaries say that earlier they had said that you have become mighty from us, meaning you're a parasite and you're taking away our wealth, and that's how you're becoming wealthy. Now that they drove him away and he remained successful and continued being successful, they admitted that it wasn't from us. Because even without us, you're being successful, and it's because Hashem is with you, and that's why they made this covenant. And they called that well that they dug Sheva, and the name of the city is Beersheba until this day. The Ramban says this is the same well that Avram had dug that they called Beersheba, and they made the covenant they're called Beersheba as well. And he said this well represents the Mishkan, the tabernacle that was in Shiloh that really stood for a long time when we first entered the land of Israel. So we had a few temporary places, and then they made a permanent tabernacle in Shiloh, which lasted for centuries. Okay, so then when Esau was 40 years old, he took wife Yudah's daughter of Beeri the Hittite. And here I say to say that this is an example of Esau's con man coming out, is that, remember, his father, Yitzchak, got married when he was 40. So Esau said, I'm just like him. He got married when he's 40. I'm going to be just like my father and get married when I'm 40. But he married a Hittite, which is a Canaanite. And there was a sort of spiritual rebellion to Yitzchak and Rivka that she was idolatrous. Okay, and now the Parsha really concludes with the fight over the blessings. So on page 135, chapter 27, and it came to pass when Yitzchak had become old and his eyes dimmed from seeing, he was blind, that he summoned to Esau his oldest son and said to him, my son, he said, here I am. And he said, see, now I've aged. I know not the day of my death. Now sharpen, if you please, your gear and go find some game, hunt some food to feed me, and I'll bless you. I'll give you the blessings. Why is it necessary that he get food for him? So our sages say really things along the same nature, but either it's that he wanted him to fulfill the mitzvah of honoring his father, because when one does a mitzvah, especially when one honors his father, he brings blessing upon himself. And while he's bringing blessing upon himself through the mitzvah, so Yitzchak's blessing will be so much greater when the blessing is coming from Hashem already. Or they say that that Yitzchak wanted to be inspired, really, to spiritually inspired for the blessings when he's eating of the food that Esau had brought to him. So that will, bring a closeness of spirit, and thereby be able to, their spirits are connected in a way that he could bless him more effectively. So Rivka found out and said to Yaakov her son, saying in verse 6, behold, I heard your father speaking to your brother Esau, saying, bring some game and make me delicacies to eat, and I will bless you in the presence of Hashem before my death. So now, my son, heed my voice at which I command you. Go now to the flock and fetch for me there 2 choice young kids of the goats. I'll make of them delicacies for your father as he loves. Then bring it to your father, he shall eat, so that he may bless you before his death. So Rivka is saying that he's planning on blessing Esau. Don't allow him to do that. You disguise yourself as Esau and take 2 goats. I'll prepare for you, and you get the blessings from him. How could she have deceived Yitzchak in this way? So our sages say that in the beginning of the Parsha, when she was first disturbed by the fighting, by the tumult going inside her, so she went to ask of Hashem, and Hashem told her, going back to page 125, in verse 23, Hashem said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 regimes from your inside shall be separated. The might shall pass from one regime to the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. So she had this prophecy that the elder shall serve the younger, and she understood that to mean that the younger one will be the one who gets the blessings of Yitzchak, who carries on the legacy of Yitzchak. So for that reason, she felt that she had a prophecy that compelled her to ensure that Yaakov would get the blessings, but she never told this to Yitzchak. She felt this was a prophecy that was given to her, and she wasn't told to reveal it, so she kept it a secret. But now she had to act to ensure that Yaakov would have the blessings. And just what were these blessings, just to understand what the conflict was. So if we go to page 139, it tells us what these blessings are. Page 139, verse 27. We'll go back, but just to see what they are. So he drew him close and kissed him. He smelled the fragrance of the garments and blessed him. See, the fragrance of my son is like the fragrance of a field which Hashem is blessed. And verse 28, may God give you the dew of the heavens and the fatness of the earth and abundant grain and wine. People will serve you and regimes will prostrate themselves to you. Be a lord and to your kinsmen, and may your mother's sons will prostrate themselves to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be they who bless you. This was the blessing that he intended to give to Esav, but he ended up giving to Yaakov, who disguised himself as Esav. So the commentaries asked that why was it what did Yitzchak see to give them to Esav? We understand that he didn't really see who Esav was. But why? But you would think that he would recognize that Yaakov was greater. So why was he giving it to Esav? In spite of that, he thought he didn't know that Esav had sold Yaakov the firstborn rights. So I think the Meshech Chochmah says, the commentaries say that if you look at the blessings are not that you'll be able to study lots of Torah and you'll do the mitzvahs. Those aren't the blessings that he was giving. The blessings are for material blessing. Though the dew of the ground, the fat of the earth, that you'll be successful in wealth. And Yitzchak's plan was that I have two sons, Esav and Yaakov, and they'll take care of two areas of life. And Esav will be the one successful in the physical world. He'll be the businessman and the farmer and the hunter, and they'll be the ones who, take care of the economy. And Yaakov will be the Kollel rabbi, and he'll be supported by Esav. That was his thinking. That was Yitzchak's way of thinking, is that Esav will, what's that?
That's not what was said originally.
What do you mean?
The older one would now do for the younger one.
Right, but Yaakov didn't know that. Yitzchak didn't know that, according to this. Right, that's what Rivka understood. Right, that's what she knew. This was what Yitzchak was thinking, though, is that I'll give the material blessing to Esav and the spiritual blessing to Yaakov, and Esav will take care of Yaakov's physical needs, and vice versa. Yaakov will take care of Esav's spiritual needs. Kind of like Yisachar and Zevulun, that our sages say that they were two brothers who were very close, sons of Leah. And Zevulun was a businessman. He was near the seashore, and he was a merchant. He went out in ships. And Yisachar stayed and carried the burden of the Torah. And Zevulun supported Yisachar in his Torah studies, and they had that partnership going. And that's really what he was thinking about Esav and Yaakov. Rivka, though, understood, besides the prophecy, she knew her brother Lavan, so she knew who Esav was and knew that this wouldn't work. And she knew that this wouldn't work and that Esav would not be there for Yaakov. And she felt that even though Esav would have this, as we'll see in the blessing that Esav actually got, that he will have these riches, but it won't belong to him. And we'll see when we get there. But anyway, that's what the thinking was. So Yaakov said, Esav's hairy. I'm not. How will I trick my father? And she put these goat skins on his arms so he'll feel hairy. Okay, so that's what he did. So Yitzchak went in disguised as Esav and got these blessings, as we just read. So it continues in verse 30. And it was when Yitzchak on page 139, and it was when Yitzchak had finished blessing Yaakov, and Yaakov had scarcely left from the presence of Yitzchak, his father. He had just left, that Esav, his brother, came back from the hunt. He too made delicacies and brought them to his father. He said to his father, let my father rise and eat of his son's game, so that his soul will bless me. In verse 32, Yitzchak, his father, said to him, who are you? And he said, I am your firstborn son Esav, meaning he had already thought he'd get blessed Esav. Then Yitzchak trembled in a great perplexity, and he said, where is the one who hunted game, brought it to me, and I partook of all when you had not yet come, and I blessed him. Indeed, he shall remain blessed. Our sages say at this point, he recognized he was deceived, but he said that blessing shall stand. And he realized the truth of that Yaakov was really the one who should be getting the blessings at this point. And when Esav heard his father's words, he cried out an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his father, "Bless me too, father." But he said, "Your brother had come with cleverness, took your blessings." He said, etc. That 2 times he took my birthright and the blessing. And on page 141 in the top line, he says, "Then he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Is there any blessing left after you blessed Yaakov?" And in verse 37, Yitzchak answered and said to Esav, "Behold, the Lord, I have made him over you, and all his kin I have given him as servants, and with grain and wine have I supported him. And for you, what can I do for my son?" He's saying, I already gave him everything. What could I bless you with? And Esav said to his father, "Have you but one blessing, father? Can't you give me another one? Bless me too, father." And Esav raised his voice and wept. And in verse 39, verse 39, so Yitzchak his father answered and said to him, "Behold, of the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and of the dew of the heavens from above. By your sword you shall live, but your brother you shall serve. Yet it shall be that when you are aggrieved, you may cast off his yoke from upon your neck." So the commentaries ask that the blessing for Esav is not that much different than the blessing that Yaakov received. That if you look, the blessing of Yaakov is on the previous page. It's may God give you the dew of the heavens, the fatness of the earth, and abundant grain and wine, etc. That's very similar to what Esav was told. What's the difference? So the commentaries say, the Kollel says that with Yaakov it said, "May God give you the dew of the heaven." By Esav it says, "Of the fatness of the earth shall be your dwelling, and of the dew of the heaven from above," meaning you'll have it, not that God's giving it to you. And that's the key difference, meaning you'll take it, but you'll take it as a thief. You'll acquire it, but it won't be yours, whereas it really belongs to Yaakov. And that's why at the end of days, Yaakov will dominate Esav, because really everything Esav took belonged to him. Okay, so in verse 41, on page 141, now Esav harbored hatred towards Yaakov because of the blessing which his father had blessed him. And Esav thought, "May the days of mourning for my father draw near, then I'll kill my brother Yaakov." He said, as soon as my father dies, Yaakov's gone. I'm not going to do it in his lifetime, but as soon as he's gone, Yaakov's gone. So, so in verse 42, Rivka was told of the words of Esav. She told him, "Go to your brother, to Lavan, my brother." I'm sorry. So Rivka said, "My brother Lavan will protect you in Padan Aram, in Aram, until your brother Esav's wrath subsides." So she told him, "Go, you got to run away and take refuge with my brother Lavan, who will protect you." Yeah. And in verse 46, it says, Rivka said to Yitzchak, "I'm disgusted with my life on account of the daughters of Ches," meaning that Esav had married Canaanite, Hittite wives. She said, these daughter-in-laws, she's not very happy with her daughter-in-laws. She said, "If Yaakov takes a wife of the daughters of Ches like these, of the daughters of the land, what is life to me?" So this she said to Yitzchak, to her husband. So Yitzchak summoned Yaakov on page 143 and blessed him. He instructed and said to him, "Do not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Go to Padan Aram, to the house of Besul, your mother's family. Take a wife from there, from the daughters of Lavan, your mother's brother. And may Kel Shakai bless you, make you fruitful, make you numerous. May you be a congregation of people. May he grant you the blessing of Avram to you and to your offspring with you, that you may possess the land of your sojourns, which God gave to Abraham." And this, you see, was the blessing, I think, that was originally for Yaakov, and that is the spiritual legacy, is that he'll have the blessings of Avram. He'll be the spiritual successor to Avram and Yitzchak, to Avraham, and be the patriarch of the Jewish people. So Yitzchak sent away Yaakov, and he went to Padan Aram to Lavan. So now his mother tells him to go to Lavan to take refuge from Esav. His father tells him to go to Lavan to find a wife. So he is very good that he's killing 2 birds with 1 stone, fulfilling the will of his father and his mother, going to Lavan. And the Aramean brother of Rivka, mother of Yaakov and Esav. And in verse 6, when Esav saw that Yitzchak had blessed Yaakov and sent him off to Padan Aram to take himself a wife from there, he commanded him, saying, "You shall not take a wife from among the daughters of Canaan, and that Yaakov obeyed his father and mother and went to Padan Aram. Then Esau perceived that the daughters of Canaan were evil in the eyes of Yitzchak his father. So Esau went to Yishmael and took Machlas, daughter of Yishmael, son of Avram, sister of Nevios, in addition to his wives, as a wife for himself. So he took another wife from a daughter of Yishmael, and so his cousin. And this, our sages say that Yaakov and Yitzchak and Rivka actually had nachas from, that this was the appropriate wife for him. Okay, shkoyach. Everybody have a great Shabbos.